back to Study Hall, everybody. And to our segment, but why though?
Where we explore the origins of everything. Today, we're going back in time to before electricity.
Wow.
Think about it. What was life like before we could just flip a switch and banish the darkness or power our devices? We're going to look at everything from lighting and heating to cooking and communication, even work and entertainment. We've got some great material to work with today.
I'm excited.
So let's dive in and see what we can learn about life before electricity.
I think what's so interesting is how connected people were with nature back then.
Right.
They relied on it for everything.
I know. It's like we take electricity for granted.
Totally.
We don't even think about it.
It's just there.
It's just there. Yeah.
We flip a switch and boom, we have light.
But back then, it wasn't that simple.
No, not at all.
Let's talk about light, for example.
Okay.
The main sources of light were candles, oil lamps, and gas lamps. But none of those were cheap or easy to use.
You're right.
So tell me about candles. Even the most basic candles, tallow candles, were a regular expense. They weren't free, you know.
Right.
And then you have beeswax candle.
Oh, yeah.
Those were a luxury.
Definitely a luxury.
Only for special occasions or wealthy people.
Then came oil lamps.
Right, starting with whale oil.
Uh-huh.
But then kerosene became more common because it was cheaper, but it's still expensive.
Gas lamps.
Gas lamps were brighter.
Okay.
But you needed gas lines installed, which cost money.
And then you had to pay for the gas itself.
Exactly.
So basically light was a luxury.
That's a good way to put it.
And that must have affected daily life.
Absolutely.
People had to live by the sun's schedule.
Yeah.
Wake up at sunrise, go to bed soon after sunset.
That's right.
So different from how we live today.
It is, isn't it?
We can stay up all night if we want to.
And we do.
We do.
But back then, nighttime was truly dark.
And quiet, I imagine.
Probably very peaceful.
But also a bit scary, maybe.
I could see that.
What about things like reading or sewing?
Those were difficult and expensive to do at night.
Yeah, imagine trying to read by candlelight.
It would be so hard on your eyes.
And the flickering light.
Yeah, and the shadows.
It wouldn't be very pleasant.
Not at all.
So life really revolved around daylight hours?
It did.
And even then, the light sources weren't exactly convenient.
You're right.
You had to constantly replace candles, refill oil lamps, trim wicks.
Yeah, it was a lot of work.
And not very efficient, either.
No, the light was dim and flickering.
And let's not forget the fire hazard.
Oh, yeah, that was a major concern.
Especially in cities with wooden buildings.
A single candle or oil lamp could start a huge fire.
That's scary to think about.
And then there's the indoor air quality.
Right, all that smoke and fumes.
That couldn't have been healthy.
Especially in homes that weren't well ventilated.
So light was precious, but also came with its own set of challenges.
It did.
It really makes you appreciate what we have today.
Sure.
Okay, so we've talked about light. Let's move on to another essential need. Warmth.
Oh.
Staying warm in the winter was a constant battle.
I bet.
The main sources of heat were firewood, coal, and eventually gas.
And before stoves, it was all about fireplaces.
Yeah, fireplaces were the heart of the home.
I love a good fireplace.
But they weren't very efficient.
I guess not.
Most of the heat went straight up the chimney.
So you had to burn a lot of wood to stay warm.
You did. And in larger homes, you needed multiple fireplaces.
Oh, wow. So even more wood.
Yeah, it was a lot of work to keep them going.
And a lot of expense.
Definitely.
So families would gather around the fireplace to stay warm.
Right. They'd huddle together in the warmest room.
And the other rooms would be freezing.
Pretty much.
I've read about bed warmers.
Oh, yeah?
People would fill them with hot coals or bricks.
And then put them in their beds to keep warm.
It sounds kind of dangerous.
It does. But they were desperate to stay warm.
I can imagine.
Then came stoves, which were a big improvement.
In what way?
They were more efficient.
Okay.
They distributed heat better and used less fuel.
So they were more economical?
Yes, and they could heat multiple rooms.
That makes sense.
Wood-burning stoves were popular at first, but coal-burning stoves became more common in the 19th century.
Why was that?
Coal burns hotter and longer than wood.
Ah, so you didn't have to add fuel as often.
Exactly.
But coal wasn't perfect either, was it?
No, it was dirty. It produced a lot of soot and ash.
So you had to clean the stove constantly.
You did, and it was messy work.
And the fumes from coal weren't good for you either.
Right, especially if the ventilation was poor.
So even with stoves, heating was still a challenge.
It was.
And the type of fuel you used depended on several factors.
Yeah, things like availability, cost, efficiency, convenience.
It wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Not at all.
In rural areas, wood was plentiful.
And often free if you cut it yourself.
But in cities, you had to buy wood.
which could be expensive.
And coal was always purchased.
Right, and it needed to be transported.
So the choice of fuel depended on where you lived and your budget.
And how much work you were willing to put in.
So we've covered light and heat.
What's next?
Let's talk about cooking.
Okay.
Before electricity, cooking was a whole different ballgame.
It was.
Wood, coal, and gas stoves were the main tools.
But before stoves, people cooked over open hearths.
Wow, that must have been difficult.
It was. You had to be really skilled.
To manage the flames and the heat.
Right. It wasn't easy.
Wood-burning stoves were an improvement.
They were.
They had better heat control.
Yeah, but you still had to tend the fire constantly.
And deal with the ashes and the smoke.
And the smoke.
Coal stoves were even hotter.
They were, but harder to light.
And even messier.
Yes, much messier.
Gas stoves were the game changer.
They were.
Instant heat and a precise temperature control.
It was a revolution in the kitchen.
But they were expensive at first.
And you needed gas lines.
Yeah, which not everyone had.
So even with stoves, cooking was still a lot of work.
And time-consuming.
And dangerous.
And smoky.
Kitchens are hot and smoky places.
It makes you appreciate modern kitchens.
It does.
And what about food preservation?
Oh, that was a whole other challenge.
There was no refrigeration.
Right.
So food spoiled quickly.
You had to eat it fast or preserve it.
And preserving food was labor-intensive.
It was.
Salting, smoking, drying, pickling, canning.
All time-consuming and messy processes.
It's amazing how much work went into just feeding yourself.
It is, isn't it?
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about industry.
Okay.
Before electricity, factories relied on water wheels, steam engines, and manual labor.
It was a very different world.
Water wheels were an early power source.
They used the power of flowing water to drive machinery.
Sounds pretty ingenious.
It was, but it limited factory locations.
You could only build a factory near a river.
Right, and water flow varied with the seasons.
So production could be affected by droughts or floods.
Exactly.
Steam engines were more flexible.
They were,
You could build a factory anywhere you had coal.
but they were inefficient.
And dangerous.
And polluting.
And coal was expensive.
So steam power had its drawbacks.
But it was a major step forward.
It was.
And manual labor was still essential.
Oh, absolutely.
Factory work was tough and often dangerous.
Long hours, low pay, no safety regulations.
It sounds awful.
It was, and child labor was common.
That's heartbreaking.
It was a different time.
Then came electricity and everything changed.
It was a revolution.
Factories became more efficient, reliable, and productive.
And safer.
And jobs became less physically demanding.
Electric lighting also made a big difference.
It allowed factories to operate for longer hours.
And it improved safety.
So electricity transformed industry.
It did. It was a game changer.
Okay, let's move on to transportation.
Okay.
How did people get around before cars?
Well, for short distances, they used horse-drawn carriages.
So no Uber or Lyft.
No, not quite.
And horse-drawn travel was slow.
5 to 10 miles per hour on average.
So a trip that takes us an hour today.
Could take all day back then.
And it was weather dependent.
You couldn't travel in heavy rain or snow.
And you had to take care of the horses.
Feeding them, grooming them, shoeing them.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It was, and the roads were often in bad shape.
I can imagine.
Muddy, rutted, full of potholes.
So travel was slow, uncomfortable, and unreliable.
Pretty much.
For longer journeys, there were steam trains and boats.
They were much faster.
But they were also expensive and sometimes dangerous.
And not very comfortable.
I've heard stories about how bumpy train rides used to be.
I bet.
In cities, electric streetcars and subways were a big improvement.
They were.
They were faster, cleaner, and more efficient.
And they helped to reduce traffic congestion.
So they played a key role in the development of modern cities.
They did.
Okay, let's talk about communication.
Okay.
Before the internet, how did people stay in touch?
The main way was through letters.
Snail mail.
Exactly.
And letters were slow.
It could take weeks or even months for a letter to arrive.
And they could get lost or damaged?
So communication was a slow, uncertain process.
It's so different from how we communicate today.
It is. We're used to instant communication.
Email, text messaging, video calls.
It's amazing how far we've come.
But back then, people had to be patient.
And they had to write well.
Because you couldn't just hit delete and start over.
Right.
The telegraph was a major breakthrough.
It was.
It allowed for near instantaneous communication.
But it was expensive.
And you had to use Morse code.
Which not everyone knew.
The telephone was another game changer.
It allowed people to talk to each other in real time.
It must have felt like magic.
I bet.
And it paved the way for other communication technologies.
Like the radio.
So electricity revolutionized communication.
It did. It connected people in ways that were never possible before.
Okay, let's wrap up by talking about entertainment.
Okay.
Before electricity, entertainment was very different.
It was.
Live performances were a big deal.
Theater, vaudeville, opera, street performers.
It was all about social interaction.
And shared experiences.
People would gather in public spaces.
To watch shows, listen to music, and socialize.
It sounds kind of charming.
It does, doesn't it?
Newspapers were also a source of entertainment.
They had serialized stories and cartoons.
And people would read them aloud to each other.
It was a family activity.
And there were board games, parlor games, dancing, crafts.
People had to be creative with their leisure time.
It sounds like they had more time for hobbies.
Maybe.
We're always so busy today.
We are.
Electric lighting extended the hours for performances.
And it made new forms of entertainment possible.
Like the phonograph and silent films.
And the radio.
So electricity changed entertainment in a big way.
It did. It brought new forms of entertainment into our homes.
Okay, one last thing to talk about.
Okay.
The spread of electricity wasn't even.
That's right.
It was concentrated in urban areas.
Because that's where the money was.
So cities were electrified first.
And rural areas lagged behind.
This created a big divide between urban and rural life. Rural communities didn't have access to the same opportunities.
And this gap persisted for many years.
Even within cities, access to electricity wasn't equal.
Wealthier households got it first.
So there was a digital divide even back then.
A digital divide, yeah, you could say
The
that.
Rural Electrification Act of 1936 was a game changer.
It was.
It brought electricity to rural America.
And it transformed life for millions of people.
It's amazing how much impact a single piece of legislation can have.
It is.
Finally, let's talk about the early development of the electrical grid.
Okay.
It wasn't a smooth process, was it?
No, not at all.
There was the battle of the currents.
Between Thomas Edison's direct current DC system
and Nikola Tesla's alternating current AC system.
Edison's DC system was good for short distances.
But it lost power over long distances.
So you needed a power plant every few blocks.
That doesn't sound very practical.
It wasn't.
Tesla's AC system was more efficient.
It could transmit power over long distances.
And it could be stepped up or down using transformers.
So you only needed a few large power plants.
Edison fought hard for DC.
He did.
But AC eventually won out.
It was the better system for widespread electrification.
And it's the system we use today.
So Tesla won the battle of the currents.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
It is.
So that was life before electricity.
A very different world.
It was shaped by daylight, manual labor, and the limitations of pre-electric technology.
It makes me appreciate what we have today.
It does, doesn't it? It's easy to take electricity for granted.
Yeah, we flip a switch and we have light, heat, power.
But back then, it was a whole different story.
It was a struggle just to meet basic needs.
And it required a lot of ingenuity and hard work.
But it also fostered a strong connection to nature.
And a sense of community.
I wonder what people back then would think of our world today.
I think they'd be amazed by our technology.
And maybe a little bit overwhelmed.
Probably.
So what pre-electric hardship do you think would be the toughest to adapt to?
That's a good question. I think the lack of light at night would be really hard.
Yeah, me too.
I'm such a night owl. I love to read and work late at night.
I do too.
And I can't imagine doing that by candlelight.
It would be so difficult.
And dangerous.
And expensive.
Yeah, all of the above.
What about you?
I think the hardest thing for me would be the lack of communication.
Really?
Yeah, I'm so used to being connected all the time. I talk to my friends and family every day. And I can't imagine having to wait weeks or months for a letter.
It would be tough.
And you never knew if your letter would even arrive.
That's true.
It was a much slower pace of life.
It was.
But in some ways, maybe that was a good thing.
Maybe.
It gave people time to think and reflect.
And to appreciate the simple things in life.
Right.
So what innovations of today do you think will have the same impact as electricity?
That's another great question. I think artificial intelligence has the potential to be transformative.
In what way?
It could revolutionize healthcare, transportation, education.
And maybe even solve some of our biggest challenges.
Like climate change.
It's an exciting time to be alive.
It is, isn't it? We're on the cusp of some incredible breakthroughs.
Who knows what the future holds?
Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the world is constantly changing.
And it's always fascinating to look back and see how far we've come.
I agree. So thanks for joining us on this journey back in time.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you learned something new, and we encourage you to keep exploring the past. because it can teach us so much about the present.
And the future.
Until next time, keep those minds curious.